All right. So I will go ahead and convene the Labor and Public Employees Committee meeting for our first task force study of the state workforce and retiring employees. And I will say that I am State Representative Robin Porter. And I have the pleasure of chairing with my co-chair, Senator Julie Kushner. And I'll just go ahead and make the introductions of who is with us and how they've been appointed to this task force. And then I will get back to the review of the scope of the task force and what it is we've been assigned to accomplish here today. So I will start with Senator Julie Kushner, who is my co-chair in the Labor and Public Employees Committee. My ranking member, Representative Harry Aurora from the House. Senator Rob Sampson, I'm not sure if he's with us, but he is the ranking member in the Senate for Labor. And then we also have the pleasure of having with us the co-chairs of GAE, Government and Administration and Elections Committee. And I do see Representative Dan Fox with us, Senator May Flexa. Not sure if she's with us yet, but she should be joining us shortly. And the ranking member, Representative Mastro Francesco. And I will just ask at this time, starting in the order that I introduce people, if you would like to take a moment to have some introduction comments to the task force committee, now would be the time to do so. And we'll start with you, Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Representative Porter, and it's good to be here together today to begin this discussion. Clearly, there's been a great deal of publicity and comment around the number of state employees who will have potentially be retiring this coming year, and clearly the agreements that led to this were made between the state and CBAC several years ago. And now it's on our doorstep, and we are really concerned about what it's going to mean for the provision of state services. So I'm very happy that we're here to begin this conversation, and I look forward to hearing from all of the appointees. Thank you for agreeing to participate. I do want to mention that you may need to contact CPN because I'm hearing some noise coming from their account. They may not realize that they are not muted. So, oh, there they go. All right, thank you. And thank you all for being here.
Yes, and I will go to our ranking member in the House, Representative Aurora.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Porter. Thank you, Co-Chair Senator Kushner. I'm delighted to be here today. I think the challenge we have is, in some sense, a historic challenge. We're going to see a major change in our workforce at the state. And I think there's a number of issues which are going to be involved in making sure that we get to the other side with a new workforce, a new, much more a different but a more effective workforce, and keep our service levels at the same level or at a higher level as possible. So I am all ears and ready to work and share ideas and discuss ideas with all of you. And thank you to all for being on this committee, on this work group, and look forward to discussions and to setting the strategy for this transition. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see Senator Sampson, so I will just move on to Representative Fox. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Chair Porter. Dan Fox here from Stanford. Look forward to working with everyone in the discussions that we'll have in the future. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being with us. I do not.
Porter,
Yes.
I did get word from Senator Flexer that she has got some work conflicts, but she will be joining us. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. And with that, I will move on to Representative Mastro Francesco. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you, Representative Porter. It's so nice to see everyone. Just real quickly, I'm really happy to be here, that we can have this dialogue in a bipartisan fashion and try to resolve the issues that we have going forward. So thank everyone for participating, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Representative Porter.
Thank you, Representative. And with that, I just will go ahead and let everyone know who we have with us and who the appointing authority was for their assignment on this task force. And I will start with one of our very own, the Representative Edwin Vargas, who was appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. We have Dan Livingston, who was appointed by the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Martin Looney. We have Sonia, and please forgive me if I butcher anyone's name. I'm going to say that right up front. But we have Sonia Worrell, who was appointed by the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives. We have Lisa Biaggiarelli, Majority Leader of the Senate appointment. We have Christian Spencer, Minority Leader of the Senate appointment. Daniel Callahan, Brian Hill, Dr. Al-Qadri, and Monica Nugent, all appointments of the chairpersons of this task force. And with that, I will just, bear with me, multitasking here. With that, I will just go ahead with the next item on the agenda would be the review of the scope of this task force. And this was established as a task force to study the state workforce and retiring employees. As Senator Kushner stated, this is of great concern to us with such a tremendous influx of our state employees in 2022 coming upon their retirement. Good for them, but maybe not so good for us. And this study shall include, but not be limited to, an examination of adequate succession planning for state employees in order to recruit and maintain the best talent in the state workforce, as well as a review of barriers to managerial recruitment. And with that, I will move on, and we will be joined by Nick Herms, who will be doing a presentation, and he is the Deputy Commissioner of Human Resources for DAS. So with that, I will turn it over to you to begin your presentation, and we look forward to what you're about to bring us.
Well, good afternoon, chairs and member of the task force. Again, I'm Nick Herms, Deputy Commissioner and Chief Human Resources Officer at DAS. I just need a moment here to share my screen and my presentation. Okay, for some reason, I am usually not accustomed to working on Zoom here. I got to make sure I'm sharing this.
And if you're having difficulties, we can always ask that Devin, the clerk for labor. You got it? Because if not, I'm sure he can share it. Okay, great.
Here we go. I just needed a minute to find it here. All right. Well, again, welcome everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you and share some insight into our state workforce and our employees that are due to retire later this year. Main agenda here, I wanted to share some key themes that we are seeing with regard to the subject of our workforce and retirements in general. We will share some statistics that we're observing through the state agencies that DAS supports. Those statistics run through November 1st. And then we can share work that has occurred already with regard to the subject of managerial salary compression and inversion. All right, from our perspective and in the big picture, our view is that the state workforce in the executive branch, particularly with agencies that are supported by DAS, By and large, we're seeing that the workforce has been and remains to be relatively stable. We are at any given time over the past 5 or 6 years, we've hovered around approximately 30,000 employees, again, in the agencies that DAS supports. And we will show that list here later. We are observing that, as expected, retirements are greater than usual, but it hasn't been a windfall. We will show the statistics here that it's slightly above average, but at least at this point, we do not view it as an emergency. And to mitigate the slight increase in retirements that we are seeing, we have noted, and we're working very diligently on, we are seeing that we are actually hiring state positions at the highest rate that we've had in about a decade. And so we're happy to share some statistics along those lines to show you that we're very, very busy in terms of maintaining our workforce and continuing to grow it. And lastly, the subject of managerial compensation is something that is discussed in many different forms. It's well recognized that it's one of the greater challenges here in our state workforce. Governor Lamont and his leadership team, from the beginning of their administration, they listened to a variety of sources on this subject. They've studied the issue, and they've taken active steps to begin to solve that problem. And so we're happy to share some of that here in a few minutes. Okay, so retirement statistics. Again, we are seeing an uptick, but it's not off the charts. It is something that, at least to date, we view as relatively manageable and not surprising. So for example, for this part of the fiscal year, from 7/1 through 11/1, we had just under 700 retirements. To draw a comparison from the year prior, you can see that, again, it's a little bit more than what we had seen last year and what we've seen in frankly the past few years. But again, this is something that we've been able to absorb and to process and handle without significant difficulty. We do note that already on file, we have almost 800 retirement applications that will be effective either this month or on through July 1st of 22. So, we acknowledge that we are still in this window of risk. There are numerous employees that are still eligible to retire that have not given us notice that they intend to do so. So really between December and July of next year, we are monitoring it closely. We are working, DAS in particular is working very closely with the Office of the State Comptroller to be as cognizant and prepared as possible in the event that we have a worst case scenario where there's a severe spike in retirements. For a little more context, and I understand that this slide is a little busy, apologies for that. I do want to draw your attention really toward the bottom of the slide where you actually see totals for fiscal years, or roughly for the past decade. You can see that for the agencies that DAS supports, we've historically have seen anywhere between 1,200 and 1,800 retirements in a year. So given that our numbers right now are nearing 1,400, we're clearly in that band And there's still more to go this year. So we do expect this to be on the higher end of this average, perhaps even to exceed it some. But in terms of historically as a state, again, we see ourselves as a little above average, but at least up until this point, when we consider the work that we've done and the applications received, we're on track. Also, and this is a point that DAS and our state agencies and our partners at OPM, we work very, very hard on, is to continue to maintain our workforce and continue the hiring that's necessary to fill all the various roles, particularly our critical public-facing direct care roles in the state. Again, apologies for the busyness of this slide. There's a lot of figures here, but if I could draw your attention down to the bottom line, particularly where we've circled in red, the figure here is along that bottom line, you can see that over the past decade, the state executive branch, particularly the agencies that GAS supports, we've filled anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 and change positions in a given fiscal year. Now, our work through 7/1 of this year on through 11/1, so 4 months, we've filled a little over 2,300 positions. Now, if we were to multiply that by 3, again, like the run rate for the entire fiscal year, that is where you see the red circle here in that column. You can see that we're on track to have the biggest year that we've had in a decade with regard to filling of positions. And we will continue, our goal is to meet or exceed this figure. It is something that we focus on every day, and coordinating and working with OPM and our operating agencies. This is a key focus of ours. We're very proud to say that we are achieving this level of production in probably one of the most challenging operating environments that we've had in the state, particularly considering all of the various workforce implications and work that our HR teams and our leadership teams and agencies have to face with regard to COVID. But when you sum all of this up, it really the bottom line is, yes, there's an uptick in retirements, and conversely, there's an uptick in hiring as well. That's the big takeaway. All right, moving on to compression and inversion plans. Again, Governor Lamont and his leadership team have done a ton of listening and analysis in consideration of the long-standing concern and issue of managerial compression and inversion. I've broken this down into 3 steps here for the task force to consider and to try to give some perspective and the approach that the administration has taken. First and foremost, it was recognized that in our CBAC 2017 agreement, there were certain terms and conditions that were afforded to our bargaining unit employees that had not been extended to our managers and non-represented employees. So the administration, on through Secretary McCaw and Commissioner Jabal, they signed and effected what we call an E-item, but it's essentially it's an order to do something. We signed an item to give the remaining terms and conditions that had been afforded to bargaining unit employees onto non-represented employees, namely a COLA, what we call an annual increment or AI, and then a one-time payment. And so that was effectuated this past summer. And really what that did is that, in our view, made managers and non-represented employees whole with regard to the key or the main terms and conditions that were found in the CBAC 2017. Additionally, this summer, here in section 194 of Public Act number 21-2, we did there was a small change made to a statute that required, that now requires that DAS shall write orders to provide terms and conditions to non-represented employees that are afforded to bargaining unit employees. Now, this was a one-word change that historically the statute had read that DAS may do those sort of things. And it's the belief that this one-word change will, for lack of a better term, create a presumption that all employees are to be treated equally moving forward in the future with regard to key pillar type of terms and conditions of employment. And we think that this will help be the basis and the energy for the state in the future to maintain that equity as we build our new workforce. And lastly, and this is ongoing, after effectuating our E-item, after a small change in statute that we do think will have an important effect on our workforce, we are in the process of surveying our agencies to identify and root out any acute cases of individual compression and inversion. We've received those reports from agencies. We are in the process of reviewing them. That process will take a number of weeks. With the holidays, this could easily spill over into early next calendar year. But the goal of getting that information is to, again, identify any acute individual effects. And then if there are any, then OPM and DAS will evaluate the need and, if necessary, take action to correct that on more of an individual basis. And so that is the activity that we've all taken as an administration to help solve this problem that realistically has grown over many decades. But frankly, I personally have seen more done in the past 2 years than I had in the few years that I've been with the state before. So it's something that we take very seriously and that we will continue to work on. And I believe that we've done our best to address the topics or questions that we were asked to present on. I avail myself to any questions from chairs or other members of the task force.
First, thank you for that presentation. We appreciate you making that to us today. One question that I have, and I'll just go ahead and ask it and get it out the way, but before I do that, I do see that Senator Flexer has joined us. She is the Senate Chair of GAE, and I would just like to offer her an opportunity to say a few words if she wishes to do so. Okay, she may be multitasking. That's something that we do.
No problem.
So once she comes on, I'll just pause and give her an opportunity to do that. I want to go back to the retirements update. I had a question around the big unknown, right, that remains on how many additional employees will perhaps decide to retire. That is definitely a window of risk. So my question is, do you have an approximate number of, let's say they all decided to retire, what would that look like? And how many people, how many additional retirees are we talking about?
It's really tough to say, Representative. Reports from the comptroller's office that we're aware of and there is documentation out there that upwards of 8,000 employees are quote unquote eligible to retire. Estimates have been made that out of that 8,000 who are eligible, that perhaps 5,000 could retire. So, we're aware that those figures have been shared. We are making preparations for the possibility of that. However, at least to date, we have not seen an indication that we're going to achieve retirement on that scale.
Okay, thank you for that response. And at this time, I will go ahead and open the floor for questions. And I'm just going to look to see. I see the senator's hand is up. Senator Kushner, followed by Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Representative Porter. And I do appreciate the presentation. I wondered if you could stop sharing your screen, then we can see everybody in the gallery.
Certainly, my apologies.
That's okay, because it's always helpful if we can see everyone. Thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation. I had heard a similar presentation as a member of the Appropriations Committee in a recent hearing. And, I think it's really helpful to know what plans you have in effect. But I do want to focus on, I think, a concern that's been raised a lot by constituents and by, fellow legislators, my colleagues, concerned that the state would not replace everyone who is retiring. And I think that comes up a lot. Some people think that by not replacing employees who retire, there'll be magnificent savings for the state. Of course, we know that the cost, that the reasons that people are retiring is because of the agreement that was made to change benefits under the CBAC agreement. But I don't think it was intended that, my impression is it was not intended that we would then replace these workers with either technology or more particularly consultants, but that we would be actually continuing the services in the department with the hiring of new employees. And, I just wondered if you have a plan. You did talk about how much hiring you're doing, but do you have a plan? Are there plans to contract out certain work or to eliminate certain work? Is that part of the equation as well?
Thank you for that question. By and large, I am not aware of any overarching strategic plan to dramatically change the size of the state workforce. Now, we can see that historically our workforce over the past decade has trended down a bit. Roughly 10 years ago, we were hovering around, again, for the agencies that DAS has supported, we were around 36,000 employees. In and around the 2015, 2016 timeframe, if we all recall, there were mass layoffs. There was a significant budget challenge. Our state workforce dipped down to that 31 to 30,000 employee count. And really since that time, so roughly over the past 4 to 5 years, we've been hovering around 30,000 employees, plus or minus at any given point in time. To the best of my knowledge, I am not aware of any plans to dramatically change that. If anything, I can share that our day-to-day expectation and guidance of HR is to work as hard as we possibly can to fill positions to make sure that our workforce is stable, remains stable. So I think that's the best way I can answer that.
Thank you for that response. I do my second question, and then I'll pass it on to others to ask questions. But you referred to the agencies and the workforce that is covered under the jurisdiction of DAS, which I understand that does not include, for instance, higher ed or some of the other areas. Do you have knowledge of what it looks like in the remaining part of the workforce that you haven't reported on today? And if not, who would be the best people for us to bring in to get that information?
Sure. No, we do not have deep insight into other areas of the state workforce who are either separate branches of government, for example, or higher ed is another example. Those are either branches or other employers that have obviously their own leadership, their own HR departments, their own budget departments, and so forth. And so if this task force or any other committee needed insight on those portions of the workforce, I would suggest reaching out to the leadership of either those branches or institutions of higher education for a comparable briefing.
Thank you, and thank you, Representative Porter. I'm sure I'll have other questions, but that's it for now.
You're welcome, Senator Kushner. Next, we have Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Chair Porter. And thank you, Mr. Hermes, for your presentation. Really appreciate that.
Representative Aurora, I think you went on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. So my first question was perhaps a clarification that you showed that we are retiring about 1,500 every year and hiring about 6,000 every year. So am I to presume that that 4,500 is like a frictional, people just, leave of our job force, leave, people leave jobs. So we call it frictional employment, I think, in economics. And is 15%, I just take 4,500 of the, the remaining, let's assume that we're replacing 1,500 from the 6,000 you hire. So 4,500 is frictional unemployment or frictional employing. Is it 15%? Is that typical for a state? Or are we having, what I'm looking for is, do we have too much turnover? Because, you
Right.
always kind of focus on that. I'm sure you do as well. So that was my first question. If you, and if there is a, you gave us a really good chart about, the number of employees retiring and added. Is there, my concern with something like what we're discussing, or not concerned, my question would be by age groups. Is it that we are getting people in different age groups now, or levels of experience? You might say that now we have more people with 5 to 10 or 10 to 15 years of experience. And 5 years ago, we had more, predominantly people with 20 to 25 years of experience. Is there a chart like that you could share with this task force to give us a snapshot of how that kind of experience level within a government workforce is perhaps changing?
Sure. Thank you, Representative. So for the first question, this is my own term here, but to work off of your term, our friction coefficient is it's a little misleading, I would think, and it's not to the low level that that you may think it is, because we are reporting on, and what we're able to report on is our positions filled. And so we are not always talking about people coming to state service and people leaving state service. There's quite a bit of internal movement where we have state employees moving from one position to another. And so that is why you see, anywhere from 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 positions being filled. Is a good chunk of that is internal movement that is natural in accordance with our statutes and collective bargaining agreements. So that's number one. So I definitely just want to assure you that we do not have what would appear to be like massive levels of turnover. So that's number one. Number two is I would have to really go back and think about if we have a way to pull data to draw a comparison between our demographic, so for example, an age and experience level today versus what it was a year ago or 5 years ago, and so forth. I wish I could give you a more direct answer or give you an immediate report. We just do not have that at this time. And part of the reason is I fear or suspect that the data is not all in one place. It's not necessarily all in our core system or our enterprise system. We would probably have to mine our applicant tracking system to come up with a framework in which to report that. So we will take a look at that. I'm not sure if I'm physically able to at this time.
Thank you. No, thank you. That answers my question. You know, my follow-up, or no, my other part, that was one question. maybe Chair Porter is going to say that was a long question. My other question was, can you expound or help us understand the real challenge which you had stated in your presentation, what we call the inversion compression challenge? Because as I'm assuming here, I did not know coming into this conversation what was the main primary reason for what is the main problem. I always think about our jobs as solving problems, and when you put that together, I think you were trying to tell us, or we at least I heard that there's a massive problem in inversion compression. Is it that people who are reporting to others are making more than them, in a sense that I report to you and you make I make more than you? Is that what the problem is? Is the problem that everybody is making the same amount because folks who have been there, or what is? Can you explain to us in a little more detail? Because some of us may not totally appreciate it. At least I speak for myself. I don't understand what is the extent of the problem. Is it that of the 30,000 people, we have 10,000 people who are getting very upset that they're getting paid less than the people who are reporting to them, or is it like 500 people, 500 of our workforce? Explain, if you don't mind talking a little more to it, that will help us understand the scope of our study.
Sure. So for, I'm not even sure, Representative, if I could give you an exact period of time. My instinct is that over many years, possibly 20 to 30 years, there was a phenomenon in the state executive branch where the state would negotiate coalition contracts, CBAC agreements, and individual collective bargaining agreements for their bargaining unit employees, which comprise obviously a significant portion of our workforce. And then state leadership at any given time, all right? And so this is over many years. At times, leadership would not, quote unquote, extend those same terms and conditions, those same increases to managers and other non-represented employees. And so when you extrapolate that over many years, in many instances, what generally has occurred is that you have bargaining unit employees, again, individual contributors, employees on staff, either making very, very close to, and that would be compression, or at times exceeding, which would be inversion, that which their manager or even division head would be making. And so that is the feedback that when Governor Lamont began his administration, he and many of the leaders on his team had received feedback from a variety of different sources, namely representative groups of our managers, that A, this phenomenon has been occurring for a long time. B, it's a problem because we are not incentivizing our talented state employees to pursue positions of greater responsibility, because they were put in a difficult position of, do I advance at the risk of actually getting compensated less and harming them as individuals and harming their families? And so that is the very nature of the problem, is that one, it's an issue of equity and fairness in our workforce. Two is there has been the expressed concern that we have self-inflicted basically a cap to career advancement in our workforce as a major employer here in the state. So in order to address that, the administration looked at activity just over the past few years, and some of the concerns raised to the administration proved to be true. For example, a number of the terms and conditions in the CBEC 2017 agreement were not extended to managers and non-represented employees. And that, again, just exacerbated the idea of compression and inversion to the point where we had managers leaving the state workforce, retiring sooner than earlier. What I would see in HR, just in my day-to-day position, I would see state employees and bargaining unit employees not applying to managerial roles. And so it's become, over the years, a serious problem. And that is what has spurred this administration to take action and to try to level the playing field and remedy this longstanding issue.
Can I just ask, Nick, just to round out and I think maybe be a little more clear about the terms and conditions that you referred to that were not extended from CBEC 2017. I believe from testimony we've heard in previous Labor Committee hearings, there were very specific numbers given about, for instance, health insurance premium costs. And I think that, you know, when you look at salary, it's not just about salary, it's about total compensation package, which is, I think, what you were trying to say, Nick. But if you could be a little more specific so we can all have the advantage of knowing like the other kinds of benefits that were not extended.
So, Senator, the key items that were not extended are the ones that I mentioned in my presentation. I mean, we clearly, until this summer, when the Lamont administration decided to extend these items, there was a cost of living adjustment, a 3.5% cost of living adjustment. There was a 4% annual increment, which is tantamount to a step, like a lateral step movement. And then there was a one-time lump sum bonus that was not extended. And so I understand and I appreciate you've mentioned healthcare premiums. That is something that is still to date different. We've received, as an administration, DAS and OPM and others have received a lot of feedback along those lines. We understand and are very aware that that's part of the quote unquote total compensation package. It's something that's being looked at. It's something that is being seriously considered. Just as we speak today and to date, there's just been no further decision just yet on that piece.
Thank you for that. I mean, I wasn't asking you to share the plan on that. I was more hoping to understand what kind of money are we talking about. So in other words, what would it look like if you are a covered employee, what kind of premium you're paying for your health insurance as opposed to if you're a managerial employee? I think that would be helpful to have some sense of it. And I'm sorry, I probably have heard this from previous testimonies, but it's not in the forefront of my mind right now.
Well, Senator, I do not have those figures off the top of my head. I can tell you that right on the comptroller's website, when you look at plans and the costs of those premiums, there is a stark difference between the cost for a bargaining unit plan versus a non-represented employee plan. And it's those figures on their website that at least it's our understanding that is at the crux of the argument or the contention that that we've heard.
Thank you. And we can take a look at that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Sonia Worrell. And please tell me if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You are pronouncing it correct. Thank you so much. I
Good.
appreciate it. Well, first of all, let me begin by thanking you for the opportunity to serve on this task force. This work is meaningful work and one that I'm very passionate about as a former manager, division director in state government. So I understand the issue from a perspective of an employee, although I'm no longer with the state for the reasons that you mentioned, Commissioner Herm. So thank you for your report. And at one point, to answer your question, Senator Kushner, it was about a 3% difference without having the pay increase in healthcare plans. And this is, I left state government in 2016. So you can think about what that looks like with the inversion as well as the compression, to answer your question. One of the questions I have, and this is a project I did work on as a part of the Governor's Aspiring Leaders Program back in 2016. And one of the biggest things that we recognized was not only the need to prepare for the retirement, but the need to prepare for the knowledge transfer as a result of retirements. An interesting fact in state government, when an employee desires or determines that they're going to retire, they're not obligated or mandated to inform their manager or director of that retirement. So typically they can keep it confidential and not be aware until like a day or two before the person leaves. And in some instances I've seen the day of. And what that means in state government is that there isn't a transfer of knowledge, whether it be the employee, particularly as we are become leaner post 2016 retirements and layoffs. That person could be working on a project and be the only person with the keys, if you will, to the information. There are current mandates in place across state agencies to ensure that there is succession planning and knowledge transfer, including documentation of procedures and manuals and information, so that we are better prepared than we were in 2016.
Well, I cannot share here that I'm aware of any mandates per se statewide, but I can share that I have observed Commissioner Jabal, Secretary McCaw, other leaders impress upon agency leadership to do the very thing that you're talking about. And I've personally witnessed agencies being very, very active of late, and to include over the past year, in partnering with DAS and partnering with OPM to plan for this year. So in terms of development opportunities, opportunities to transfer knowledge, opportunities to reorganize, to shoulder anticipated absences or holes in an agency's organizations. All of those types of things I've personally witnessed agencies do, and frankly, I tip my cap to our agency leaders because they are doing this in the midst of probably some of the most challenging operating environments that any of us have faced, where they are continuing have to face and handle new challenges with regard to COVID, and they're doing so in a terrific fashion, but also maintaining focus and having an eye trained on what's ahead of them in terms of their own workforce. So again, short answer, I have not seen any written or direct mandate, but it's inherently believed in the administration, and I am personally witnessing leadership take action.
Thank you. And I guess my follow-up question to that is the next generation workforce. One of the things that I have personally tried to do in my roles was to develop and recruit for future generations by partnering with the state schools. Is there any work from Department of Administrative Service that's being done to grow the workforce for the future generation as we see individuals retiring and that frictional employment increasing, particularly now that we have somewhat of an employee market occurring? So we may see additional transitions out of state government.
So thank you for that question. And the short answer is absolutely. So while this really was not the subject of today's briefing, we did recently brief on an update of DAS's HR centralization initiative. And to be as brief as possible here, one of the key components of HR centralization that we're very proud of is by reorganizing our HR structure here in the state, we've been able to, for the first time that we can remember or see, we've been able to center and focus resources on this very task, where we have HR people dedicated toward outreach and actively recruiting passive candidates out there in the nation, and frankly, in some cases, the world, so that we continue to have healthy pipelines for our agencies to hire staff. So it's something that the state had just never even, frankly, considered before, given our highly decentralized HR structure. It was much more of a transactional mindset. For the first time, we have a group of HR employees that are strategically looking ahead and finding new and contemporary ways to, I would say, primarily digitally connect with and recruit individuals from all over the place, and not just in Connecticut.
Is that it for you, Sonia? Did you have any further questions?
Thank you. That answers my questions. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And before we go on to Monica well, you know what? Let's go ahead to Monica Nugent. You're up next, madam. You have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, I apologize. I'm coming home from vacation in the car. I had two quick follow-up questions that came up during the presentation. The first was in terms of the statute change that was made. I know that the may to shall was changed, but it didn't seem that, at least, and I'm not an attorney by any means, but in my interpretation of the statute and from conversations with colleagues, it doesn't necessarily seem that wages extend to the definition of benefits. So I don't know, Deputy Commissioner Herms, if you have any more knowledge or background about kind of what is the administration's interpretation on that. And moving forward, you know, Governor Lamont may not be the governor forever. We know that as a fact at some point. How do you think that language will transfer to future administrations?
Well, I can tell you that our interpretation is probably largely a function of how that statute has been practically implemented historically, and it has included wages. I mean, that's just been the pattern. Every time that we've instituted or assigned an item, which is essentially a policy authority document, it's largely included some sort of compensation element. So, you know, I would say probably the best way to explain is that's been our practice, and certainly that's when working on this legislative change, that was really the vision too, was to create the presumption of equity. Now, very difficult for me to answer the second piece. I'm like the rest of us. I don't know what the future will hold in terms of future administrations. I can tell you that, I mean, everything that I've been a part of in this administration has really been very much focused on solving the problem of compression and inversion that's been brought to this administration's attention. So I would just say for now, that's where we're focused. We're focused on working the problem so that we have as much fairness as equity as we can achieve. I think that's the best I can share with you at this moment.
And thank you for that. I understand, you know, we can't predict the future, but I think it would be worth a further discussion amongst, you know, the task force to see if there is some sort of possibly strengthening into that definition that could be made to make sure that in future administrations that wages are included. The second question was a follow-up to the survey that was done. Could you give us a little bit more detail about what exactly that process looked like? As you may know, I am president of Managerial and Exempt Employees United. We are the organization that represents managerial and exempt employees who do not have bargaining unit or CBAs. And so I have heard from some of our members about kind of that they didn't really hear about the process. So I would be interested to hear, and I think it would be benefit the group to hear what that process looked like.
Sure. Well, very, very generally, it involved a communication from DAS and OPM leadership to agency commissioners. And it involved instructions to agencies' administrative teams, namely and particularly the HR teams that support those agencies. And the basic instructions were to communicate to DAS and OPM instances of compression and inversion. And we gave, again, for lack of a better term, like a framework to do so. You know, there were spreadsheets with instructions and so forth, so that agencies knew how to respond and provide the necessary information so that the individual instances could be evaluated later on.
So just quickly, so there was no actual feedback from managers themselves. It was all basically data pulled by HR within the agencies?
Correct. It was a study and analysis done. Yet again, we have the information of obviously our rosters and what people are compensated and who reports to people. So we felt we were comfortable that we had the information necessary to do this next step in the study.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that, Monica. Before I go on to Representative Mastro Francesco, I just want to go back really quickly to something that Sonia had brought up around the, that there's not an obligation, you're not obligated or mandated around the retirement piece. And we were talking about the 3% difference in healthcare. And you referenced a plan that you all were working with. Is there any way for you to share that plan with the task force?
I'm sorry, Representative. I'm not sure if I fully understand the question.
When you guys were discussing, I made notes where you were talking about, Sonia had brought up the healthcare, the 3% difference. And we were talking about how there's no obligation, that there's no mandate. You said that you knew of no mandate yourself that did that, but then you went on to talk about some kind of plan that you all had been working on to address that, was my understanding. No?
I believe that I acknowledged that there is a difference in payment. I do know that this administration has received a lot of feedback on that difference, and it is something that we are looking at. But in terms of an actual plan or an action plan or in a final decision on what to do about that feedback, we do not have that just yet. That I'm sure that's something that we will continue to look at. We understand the dynamic, and I think that's the best way I can answer you, Representative. But we do not have a plan per se to share.
Okay, but you guys are headed in that direction. Is that correct? Is this something that you're really taking a hard look at? Are you looking to implement a plan to address the concerns that are being expressed? I guess is the question.
Right. Well, Representative, I think I'm reluctant to go too far on this. I can say that if I had to restate it, number one, we are very, very aware of the issue. We're sensitive to it. It is being considered by the administration and leadership. I am not aware of any imminent decision at this time. I'm sure that this has to be a part of Secretary McCaw's team at OPM, and obviously their work with the governor's office to see if it is in fact a possibility or something that really should be done this year.
All right, thank you for that response. And I don't know if there's anyone else that would want to weigh in on that, just to kind of give us an idea of some kind of direction that may be taken in order to address this.
I would just only offer that it does go to the total compensation, inversion, and compression issue. And I think that's recognized here in this meeting and acknowledged. So if you give a 2% increase in salary and the managers have not received a 2% increase or a COLA in the last, I think it was when I left, it was almost 10 years. In 10 years. And so the 2% still doesn't account for the difference in the healthcare that they've been paying over the time frame. And so I think that's something that's been acknowledged that needs to be addressed, but that does have to be contemplated in the total picture.
Thank you for that, Sonia. And with that, I will move on to Representative Mastro Francesco, followed by Dr. Al-Qadri, followed by Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Representative Porter. I think you probably answered a little bit of my question that I had for Mr. Herms, but when you talked earlier about the number of people that possibly would be retiring, and a concern was the pay scale. And you mentioned in the 2017 agreement, the terms and conditions were not extended to the management employees and the non-union, non-bargain people. The 3.5% COLA and then the 4% annual increment that was not given to the management. What is the difference between what they are currently receiving? So is management employees annually get a 1%, 2% raise, and the difference is maybe 1.5%? What is the average, I guess, that the management and the non-bargaining unit employees are receiving that's different than the 3.5?
Well, Representative, maybe the best way I could characterize this is that over the long run, frankly, there really was no framework. It was a policy calls were made by various administrations at various times when leadership at the time felt it was an appropriate thing to do to increase compensation. And I would say typically or historically, there was some correlation to decisions and activity that resulted through out of the collective bargaining process and what resulted to bargaining unit employees. I can tell you that that was a essential reason why we wanted to pursue our change in statute was to create some sort of framework so that we would have the ability to manage within that framework to try to maintain some sort of equity amongst the various rungs in our workforce.
So if I understand correctly, the management employees were not, it wasn't an annual raise that they were given. Like the target, it would just be random. Maybe this year they would get it, next year they would not. When they were afforded, given an increase, do you have an, excuse me, an average of what the percentage was? Any idea?
Representative, that's tough to say. You know, if the task force needs sort of like what the historical decisions of state leadership were on this, that's something that we can provide.
Okay, okay. I was just curious. So I understand that. And then the other question I have is the agencies that you oversee right now. What is the percentage or how many employees right now are working from home still, and in that, and then what percentage are in the office, and did that have an effect at all on any retirement decisions that they may have?
Thanks, Representative. It's a very interesting question. I don't know if I have exact data to apply to that. I can say that very generally, over the past, since the onset of COVID, our workforce has operated at roughly, approximately half our workforce has had some semblance of telework. That makeup is very different depending on the agency that you're talking about. Obviously, our direct care agencies have much more on-site presence than others. However, it's tough for me to give an exact answer at the moment, just because, and Mr. Livingston is here on the call. We are in the midst of coming to a conclusion with our long-term statewide telework policy. He and his team and the state team have worked a long time on arriving at a final telework agreement. How that ultimately shakes out agency by agency remains to be seen. So I don't know if I can tell you as of today what the percentages will be long-term.
Thank you for that. I was wondering what the percentage is as of now, like how many employees are in the departments that you oversee are working from home?
Roughly half, on the aggregate.
Do you have a number though, like a number?
Well, again, I would say approximately half is approximately 15,000.
Okay. And so I was just curious, have you heard any of the possible people that want to retire? Is that being a reason for retirement that would maybe drive up that number?
I do not have any facts to share, Representative. We have received anecdote that, and again, I want to emphasize that this is pure anecdote here. We have received on occasion feedback that telework has actually slowed the curve of retirements, and it's helped prolong the careers of some of our employees. But again, I would urge you to take that for what it's worth. I mean, we've gotten some of that feedback in pockets of our workforce.
Okay, well, thank you very much for answering my questions. Thank you, Representative Porter.
You're welcome, Representative. Dr. Al-Qadri, am I saying that correctly?
You are saying that perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hermes, for your presentation. I've got a couple of questions real quick, and I believe the numbers are 1,369 people came into state workforce last fiscal year. So we had about 1,293 retire. So that's roughly about 70 in fictional employment replacement, if you will. I'm sure there's a higher number of frictional employment that happened. So we probably can get to those numbers, but there's no way we're replacing all the retirees with new employees, because there's more than 70 people who left the state workforce due to non-retirement. So we have about 30,000 employees, roughly about 29,000 full-time employees today in the state workforce. We know that July 2022 is the ultimate cliff in terms of the CBAC incentives. So people, if anybody is likely to retire and they are happy working from home, they are likely to stretch that up until probably July 22, because the incentives there are, CBAC is what's driving the retirements, not the working conditions. So it's fair to say that there's likely to be a big cliff ahead of us. We know that 700 indicated that they're retiring. We don't know what the other 8,000 are likely to do over the next 7 months. So I think it would be wise to plan for a cliff. Can you tell us a little bit about what the state is doing to plan for that cliff? And I also want to ask about what measures are being taken to ensure that the replacement employees are, or if we're having any replacement lines, that replacement is occurring in a way that's adjusting for historic underrepresentation of women and people of color in the state workforce. These retirements are opportunities to fix previous underrepresentation, and it would be really good to hear what the state is doing or has done to ensure that new hires are correcting for previous, underrepresentation.
Sure. Good to see you, Dr. Al-Qadri. Okay, so I'll try to address this in a systematic fashion. Let's first talk about what the state is doing to prepare itself to shoulder what could potentially be a mass exodus of employees to retirement. So we've done a couple things. First and foremost, this has been part of our planning for HR centralization in DAS. All right, we've created specialized teams at DAS that handle retirement processing, that front-end interaction with employees. Historically, in the decentralized HR model, that was done on an ad hoc basis, largely agency to agency, where someone would interact with an employee, typically face-to-face, and it would represent a very, very small component of their, what I would call HR generalist work. spotty expertise at best, because it's just not something that it's perishable knowledge and skills to be able to do that. We've completely changed that model where we have approximately 10 HR employees now, essentially split up into two teams, one for hazardous duty and then one for regular retirement, where our state employees go to this team, and the processing of a retirement now on that front end component is at, we have an all-time high in terms of expertise, because they've been exquisitely trained by subject matter experts and in partnership with the subject matter experts at the Retirement Services Division at OSC. So we really have, as a broad organization, for the first time, alignment between the team at the Office of the State Comptroller, our HR team, who specializes in retirement processing and interacting with employees. And then furthermore, we've done a lot of work to automate this process, to minimize a lot of the physical interaction and face-to-face work that takes up a lot of time. So we've been able to slim this process down to the point where we're very comfortable, where we can handle large and much larger than we presently do quantities of employees who want to retire. Furthermore, I can tell you that I've been so happy with the partnership at the Office of the State Comptroller between their agency leadership and the leadership in their retirement services team. Again, I've never observed such good partnership, where they have thoroughly looked at their processes as well and how it feeds into ours, so that we can be as most efficient as possible. They've put out a ton of new information from a counseling perspective to our state workforce on their website. They are holding group meetings to educate our employees on options for retirement. They've done, and again, I can't speak for them. They do not work for me. Obviously, these are retirement services employees, but just from observation, they've done a tremendous amount of process improvement in-house to prepare for a spike in retirements as well. So that's probably the best way that I could, just a ton of reorganization and process improvement to get us to the point where we feel as prepared as we've ever been as an organization to handle a mass exodus. All right, so let's pivot to the next phase here of what are we doing here to attract our future workforce, and to the extent that we are doing work in the diversity space, so that we have a workforce that's reflective of our citizenry. Again, I would, the launch pad for this really is HR centralization. I won't spend a lot of time on describing how we've centralized recruitment. I've explained some of that before, but I can tell you that, again, for the first time, because this activity did not exist prior to HR centralization, we have teams of HR employees whose focus and their jobs revolve around recruitment, and there's an emphasis on diversity recruitment. We are leveraging technology like LinkedIn and job boards, or technology like, you might be familiar with Handshake. I'm sure you are with higher education. We leverage Handshake, which is essentially a job board for college graduates or soon-to-be graduates. We are scaling that nationwide. We have partnered with a number of historically Black universities and colleges. We've partnered with a lot of colleges with a high percentage of Latino and or Asian student populations. We are being very, very deliberate in our effort to conduct outreach and interact with institutions of higher education that perhaps we never would have considered before. We are actually seeing interest in our state jobs for this. And so we are continuing to do things like that. And another portion that I want to point out, that an activity that has never occurred before, is, again, we are personally reaching out to passive candidates, particularly for our hard to fill STEM roles. And we are seeing the needle moved ever so much by actively doing that. And we are behaving as a large organization, much like some of our peer competitors in the private sector, where we are much more aggressive today in our pursuit of candidates for tough to fill positions than we have ever been. Because frankly, before we've had this is the first time we've ever had a unit like this. Before, that sort of activity was either non-existent or spotty at best, with potentially questionable techniques and tactics to do so. So, this is probably a conversation we could have forever. But I think, in a nutshell, I think in terms of what are we doing to prepare for employees leaving and for hiring new employees, this is what it looks like.
Thank you. And I do believe up next we have Senator Kushner. You took your hand down?
I did, because
Okay.
it's a question I was going to ask and you addressed it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And next in queue, I have Brian Hill with the Judicial Branch. Brian, how are you? Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well in another context, Representative, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Senator Kushner. Mine is more of a comment than a question. I just wanted to respond to Senator Kushner, your question about to Deputy Commissioner Herms about non-DAS agencies and some of the information. So I represent the Judicial Branch on this task force, and I can echo a lot of the themes that Deputy Commissioner Herms spoke about. Our retirement figures are up this year in the Judicial Branch. We're approaching, actually we've exceeded 2017 levels of retirements, which was the last time we saw a big push for Judicial Branch employee retirements. Our overall workforce is largely stable over the last 5 years. And again, to echo the previous figures from the DAS represented agencies, we saw a reduction in our workforce after the layoffs in 2016, but relative stabilization over the last 5 years. So as not to prolong my comments, I'd be happy to provide any information to the task force as we continue down our work. And thanks again to the Deputy Commissioner for his presentation.
Thank you, Brian. And because that was a response to Senator Kushner's question, I will give you the floor at this time, Senator Kushner.
Thank you. It just sparked another question, though, which is, have you had the same, do you have the same experience in judicial as we heard from Nick about DAS, and the rest of the jurisdictions have with compression and inversion? And if so, since we have you making comments, could you address that a bit?
Yes, of course, Senator. We have, this has been an issue that we've examined in the Judicial Branch. Again, many of the themes that the Deputy Commissioner brought forth are similar to that which we've experienced in the Judicial Branch for the same reasons. We have also, to make comment on the second part of the presentation, which was the three-step plan that was outlined to address managerial compensation. Our compensation for managers is set by vote of the Supreme Court, and we took a very similar action to, I think, in an effort to level the playing field for managerial employees as it compared to the CBAC agreement of 2017. So on July 20th this year, the Supreme Court voted to award cost of living adjustment and annual increments to and one-time bonus lump sum to level the playing field with those covered under collective bargaining in the 2017 CBAC agreement. We also took the step of mirroring, also by Supreme Court vote, the compensation framework moving forward to be very similar to that of the statute that was referenced In direct response to your question, we have also examined and are taking a closer look at compression and inversion issues within our managerial ranks.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And up next, we have Danny Livingston. You have the floor.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you all for the opportunity to serve on this important task force. But just a couple, I think, comments more than questions and clarifications about both of the issues that Nick reported about. First of all, with respect to the comments about the benefits of CVAC 2017 not being accorded to managers, I would suggest a slightly different frame. The CVAC 2017 was primarily an agreement calling for sacrifices, and it called, in fact, for 3 hard zeros from represented state employees. What did happen, however, was that in the final 2 years there were wage increases, COLAs, and so managers were who obviously don't have collective bargaining. Managers faced the same sacrifices but didn't get any of the benefits. But it is important not to lose track of the first set of sacrifices. All state employees, managers and representative employees have made tremendous sacrifices in terms of wage increases and health care premiums since the Great Recession of 2008, where we've had 3 concession agreements in a row: 2009, 2011, 2017. Representative employees went 6 years without wage increases during that period, beginning in fiscal 2010 till now. And unrepresented employees went 8 out of those years. So yes, managers fell behind, but only in the sense that they made even greater sacrifices than the unionized workers made. But everybody has fallen behind, and so it's important to keep that in mind. Also, the case on health insurance premiums. It is not that state employees are paying lower health insurance premiums if they're represented than they were before. State employees' health insurance premiums have gone up, many of them as much as 3% as a result of the 2017 agreement. But managerial health insurance premiums went up more as a result of the fact that the General Assembly raised premiums for unrepresented employees. So I think that context is important. We're talking about overall sacrifice by all state employees, represented and non-represented. And I also want to comment on this question about the risk of the 2022 retirements. I do think it's correct, as some of the questioners have asked, to consider it a very substantial risk. We don't know how many people are planning to retire as of July 1. The Comptroller's Office is doing a tremendous job trying to educate people about the changes and make sure people know that in many cases they're not as great as people may think. But nevertheless, we are talking about mass retirement potential on top of an already depleted workforce. I don't know when you all heard the report of going from 36,000 to 30,000 in the DAS covered units in about a decade. That's a tremendous loss in terms of services to the people of this state. So even before this massive retirements, we have understaffing in every one of our direct service areas. We're not providing the healthcare services that people need because we can't fill jobs. We have tremendous risk inside our corrections facilities, where we have people being mandated to work triple shifts, and we can't fill jobs there. We have areas that are still under court supervision in human services and social work in terms of kids in DCF. So when we talk about the risk of mass retirement, it's a risk of mass retirement in a tremendously under-resourced workforce already. And so I do think that one of the reasons this group is so important is because the risk is great, and we should not underestimate it. So that's just a few comments as we get started. I do want to just join the comments about diversity in the workforce as well. The CVAC Coalition has brought to the General Assembly and will in the past and will bring again and to the administration ideas about improving diversity in the workforce. And that has to include not just recruiting from outside, but opportunities for promotion and advancement. And so there's a lot of work to do in that area, and we hope very much to be part of it.
Thank you, Danny, for those comments. Very.
Robin, I think you're muted. Your phone is muted, Robin.
Okay, can you all hear me now? Okay, and I'm coming in from my phone because I'm having a problem that I was having earlier with the unstable internet connection, so I apologize for that. But I was just thanking Danny, Mr. Livingston, for the points that he made, and it just kind of reminded me of what we went through with DOL during this COVID pandemic, and not having, you know, the number of state employees that we needed in that agency to efficiently address, you know, COVID, which was really problematic because it actually started pre-COVID. We weren't fully staffed to capacity and need prior to COVID. So thank you, Danny, for putting that on the record. And I was going in and out, so I apologize for that because I did miss some of that in my efforts to connect by phone. And I don't see any other hands raised. Are there any other questions for Deputy Commissioner Herms at this time? No? All right. Well,
sorry, I actually did. I did need to just ask Nick some questions, or ask if information can be provided about areas in which the state is having trouble filling jobs, because I know there are a number of them, and I think it would be good for this group to be made aware of those.
Yes, and I think I'll count that as the next bullet on the agenda, Mr. Livingston, is next steps, since this is something that we're going to be asking that be supplied to the task force. So you are free to go ahead and ask your questions. Thank you.
That was pretty much what I was looking for. If it was whether or not the DAS had could supply information on where it's seeking to fill jobs and where it's having trouble in recruitment and retention, because I know that there are a number of those areas, and some of them are quite critical.
Okay, thank you. And I do see Dr. Al-Qadri's hand is raised. You have the floor.
So we're in the in higher education, putting out graduates, and we know how attractive anybody graduating with any kind of public sector skills is these days in the state. And the reality is there is probably a workforce problem in terms of the public and nonprofit sectors, the people available for the public and nonprofit sectors within the state, and it would be really good if Deputy Commissioner Hermes would give us an idea about the problems they're having filling positions. I know state and local governments are hurting badly with positions staying on for years, for months without getting filled.
Thank you, and I will definitely give you an opportunity to respond to that, Deputy Commissioner Herms.
Thank you, Representative. So we will be able to provide data along these lines, very generally. And from my opinion, just based on observations of the work that our teams do, is far and away the most challenging area of recruitment is licensed healthcare. That's a global issue, and just an incredibly competitive field. It's probably number one by a long shot. A distant second would probably be STEM career fields, particularly licensed positions, engineers, architects, positions of that nature. Shortly behind that, obviously, technology positions, incredibly competitive. Another area that is interestingly a challenge, I understand, for municipalities and for state agencies are skilled trades. Even these days, a commercial driver's license. It's a very competitive market for those types of roles as well. So in that cascading order, I would view as probably the greatest challenges that we have here in the state workforce, and I would argue it probably mirrors the challenges of most other employers as well.
Thank you for that. And I would like to also give Mr. Hill, Brian, an opportunity to speak to your branch's service with judicial, if you wanted to address that question.
Sure. I think very acute right now, though, obviously on a much smaller scale than the executive branch's technology jobs. That's been an area where we've had big challenges recruiting skilled employees in information technology, and that obviously dominates so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I'd say we've had some challenges that we've discussed, with the Appropriations Committee around our courthouse security positions. And we've certainly taken some steps to generate some ideas on how to fix that. And yeah, so I'd say those are our two primary areas right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And in the way of next steps, is there anything else that we can think of that we may want to discuss moving forward? And this is to everyone as we look at this issue. No, I'm totally audio right now. I'm not sure because everyone's frozen.
I saw two hands, Robin. I saw Dan Livingston and Representative Aurora.
Thank you. So in that order, can we have Mr. Livingston followed by Representative Aurora? Thank you, Senator Kushner.
Sure.
So just in terms of getting a sense of, we can sort of look from the other side. One side we talked about is getting a sense of where we're having trouble recruiting. I think the other side to look at is, where we're having trouble serving people's needs. We know we have areas where there are waiting lists. We know we have areas where we used to have mental health professionals able to deal with crises and off shifts, and now we have to call local police to deal with those crises, which is not best for police or for the people that are having a crisis. There's just a couple of examples. I think that, wherever agencies have information about where they are not fulfilling their missions because they don't have the resources to do it, that's a place where there's particular risk. If there are going to be retirements, obviously by definition it's just going to get worse. So I think that would be helpful information to gather as we look at the scope of this problem.
Thank you. Thank you. I agree with that. Representative Aurora, you have your hand up?
Yes. Am I muted? No. Okay, good. I think we were in an earlier conversation, this afternoon with chairs of the committee on a different subject. I think I might be repeating that some of what we discussed, that I think it's important for us to prioritize and our problem set. What are we trying to solve for? Because on one side, I heard saying that we're trying to solve for a recruiting problem, that we're going to have a lot of people leave and we're going to, be short people in this very difficult market for talent. But then I kind of heard from Deputy Commissioner that we got it with the amount of effort they have put in, and they got a good handle of it. So that kind of reduced or allayed some of my concern whether that should be the highest priority for, or if that is the question we are going to be asking. We heard about numbers. Second, when I was making my notes, the second thing I heard was that the inversion compression is a big problem. But then I was very pleased that Deputy Commissioner already had said that the Lamont administration has put in a number of measures. So I did not know whether we need to discuss that or find a solution to that problem, or whether it's already being addressed and there's some things we as a legislator need to really perhaps think about, and that could be number two. And the third, which basically came about, was a strategic plan, what we are thinking about in terms of usage of technology, or will it affect service levels. I didn't specifically hear too many ideas today, but they came to my mind that can we use technology differently, or service levels definition. But then again, that requires subject matter experts in each department. So for some of us here, I speak for myself, to speak about the effectiveness of use of technology in human services would not be a productive use of time. But then perhaps we could have some general rules built around it. And finally, I heard about diversity, using this as an opportunity to focus on certain diversity. So I heard four I noted down 4 objectives, and I didn't know how to prioritize myself, because I thought there were solutions in each one of them being offered already. So perhaps what I would suggest, I think Senator Kushner had in a different setup suggested that perhaps we need to all think about what are the priorities for this committee to achieve at the end of whatever the sessions we have, so that we can focus our discussions, because most of these are very, very different different objectives, and some of them appear not to be in the although they're very important, may or may not be as effective of us trying the problem in this setup. So that was my comment. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Representative Aurora. And I think that you make a good point. The suggestion is taken, and we can weigh that among the task force members. But when it comes to recruiting, there is the issue of a possible cliff, and those are concerns that are legitimate. We would like to see that addressed. And the inversion compression part, the measures, I think that those measures need to be outlined for us, so that we all have clarity on what they are, so we can make an assessment on, effectability, strategic plan, diversity, all of that. It is all, like you said, different, but all important. So I think all of that is on the table. And with that, I will go to Senator Kushner, because I see you have your hand raised. So you have the floor, madam.
I do this time. I wanted to comment on the next steps. The suggestion that was made by Dan Livingston to collect information from agencies about where they are currently struggling, this is the way I understood it, struggling to provide services. And I think that's a really important piece of the equation that we haven't really heard reported out. So I actually wanted to ask Deputy Commissioner Herms if that is something you've already engaged in, and if not, is that something you think could be undertaken by DAS through the centralized HR system you have? So that's my first thought about that.
Thank you, Senator. My first instinct is it would be difficult to do this without significant, obviously, it would have to come from the top, really, from the governor's office and to include the Office of Policy and Management. It really speaks toward a major resource and policy decisions. And so I really do not believe that DAS alone would be able to be helpful in this discussion. We certainly would partner and support, but what is being asked for, it sounds like, is something very substantial. That's part and parcel of the development of a budget process. So I am reluctant to be able to say that we can deliver on any of that in a vacuum.
I appreciate that answer. I think, it is obviously something when we are, both Representative Porter and I serve on appropriations, and when we are addressing the budget, we have agencies come before us, and we get to ask a lot of these questions, and it's a very detailed and laborious process. But I do think that in most cases, from my experience, what we're hearing from agencies at that point in that budget process is more of a, what do we have? What do we have now? How many vacancies do we have? Are we going to, fill those vacancies? Or are we going to carry over the ability to fill those vacancies? Or are we going to, hold back? And I don't think we really get at the question deeply of what is the status of our ability to provide services that we're required to provide. There are definitely times when that direct service issue comes up, when it's with regard to, like, how many beds do we have available to young people who are struggling with mental health issues. We have those discussions when we're in that appropriations process, but it feels like a survey of this type, particularly linked to the fact that we're going to face a potential cliff, is what Dan was talking about. And I feel like that is something that would be appropriate for us to sort of put on the fast track. I recognize that, this is discussion here, and that we're not expecting you, Deputy Commissioner, to make the decisions here on how to proceed. But I think it's something we could put on our next steps for action items that we would like to see come out of this, recommendations that could come out of this task force. So the second thing that I was wondering if you could address, and it may have already been incorporated into your presentation, but I know that there were outside consultants that were used to help DAS formulate its plan for recruitment and for anticipating retirement. I think it was the Boston Consulting Group that was used. And was all that information incorporated into the reports that you've given us, or is there additional report that would be worthwhile for us to take a look at?
Thank you, Senator. So, I mean, there is not an additional report other than obviously the Boston Consulting Group report out. We in HR worked very closely with the Boston Consulting Group. It was an enlightening process, and it was wonderful to speak with experts on the subject of on recruitment and talent acquisition and overall process. Obviously, there's a variety of recommendations in that report, some of which we are actively working on. Others are, we're aware of that are that could be very helpful, but we look at it from the standpoint of it's not something that DAS or the state as an employer can unilaterally act on. Our overall process for filling a position in recruitment, obviously, is governed by a variety of different statutes, collective bargaining agreement provisions, equal opportunity affirmative action regulations. It's frankly it's a web of authorities, and so some of the recommendations that we acknowledge as valid and helpful. But in terms of being able to implement some of them, it would require changes in the various authorities in order to do so. So I think I would leave it as we're really appreciative of the interaction and the exercise of going through that with the Boston Consulting Group. There's a lot of good recommendations in there. And it's a work in progress to try to be able to achieve or to be able to act on some of those recommendations.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. That was the last of my comments and questions.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. I was just wondering, because you were talking about the consulting group, Is it possible for us to get a list of what you've taken out of that and what you feel is worthy of being worked on, so we can have an idea where you all are and where you're headed?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions, concerns, comments, suggestions on our next steps as we move forward from task force members? Yes, Monica Nugent, you have the floor, madam.
I was just wondering, and I don't want to overstep by any means, but I wonder if some of these suggestions and the multifaceted things that we have been talking about might benefit from possibly some subcommittee work. You know, I know we don't have access to every subject matter expert, and a lot of these areas have multiple things that fall under like a broader category. So just a suggestion to the chairs to discuss if, you know, maybe some subcommittee work to kind of delve deeper into some of these subjects might be worthy.
Thank you for that suggestion. And as you know, we've gotten started quite late, but as we stated with the last task force this afternoon, we will be looking to extend this. We should be, according to the statute, reporting out on January 1. But with taking that into consideration, that is something that I'm certain, and I won't speak for Senator Kushner, I'll let her weigh in, that we would certainly be willing to do if time permits.
Yeah, I think that, Monica, if you have some suggestions, or if any members of the task force have suggestions for next steps, such as subcommittees, that if you could forward them to our clerk, to Devin Smith, share them with the chairs, and then we can look at those for the next meeting, and you know, if it seems appropriate, even try and work on some of the suggestions before the next meeting. So I think that's a very helpful suggestion. And we can share the, you know, anything we get, and that's why anything that is sent us, if you send it to our clerk, Devin Smith, then he will make sure that members of the task force get, that it gets shared with members of the task force.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. I do see Mr. Callahan's hand raised. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Representative Porter, and thank you, Senator Kushner, for having me on this committee. I'm here as a managerial representative for the state and have worked previously with the Management Advisory Committee on the managerial compression issue. So I just wanted to comment on those. I think they have been addressed by the Lamont administration in a large part. You know, we're very happy with those results that came out. I think it took courage for the administration to do what past administrations haven't done to address a good percentage of the managerial compensation issues. That said, there still are isolated issues. I think Nick said, you know, we are looking at those with our commissioners and with DAS and OPM. And I think that process is going through. We're doing a lot of work in HR to try to address those and get those, the data, the hard data on that to show, you know, where there still may be some pockets of issues with certain job types. On the recruitment issues and the labor market issues, they're challenging. They're going to be challenging as we go along. We've really seen, especially, you know, from the DOT standpoint where I am right now, the trades issues is going to become an issue, the shortage of people in the trades with people going out. I think that's an opportunity for this task force and for in other areas to improve a lot of situations is I think at some point that's going to become the new upper middle class, the people with the CDLs, the people with the trade skills. I think it's going to be very important as we go forward when we look at those opportunities. So I'll be willing to work on any of the subcommittees that we establish. And I just want to thank you guys for having me here. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for being with us. just real quick, because you prompted a question, you talked about there's still some isolated areas or events. Do you want to briefly speak to that? Or I'm looking at the time, it's 4:51. We may be able to put that on our agenda for our next meeting's discussion.
Sure. There are, in some of the professional classes, especially the hard to get managerial classes, say if we're doing nationwide searches, I can use our agency as an example, but the certain salary constrictions, DAS has certainly worked with us on hiring rates to get people in sometimes for singular positions, but the engineering positions in particular for the DOT, those are some of the sore spots, and they've been, as I said, the amount that was adjusted to make up for past lack of raises at those points. It did go a long way. When we redid our numbers from before the summer to after the summer, there were a lot of adjustments that were made based on the amount that was given through the Lamont administration to try to get to those inequities. So, but those would be the ones off the top of my head. But they're just isolated for us and now, as opposed to the very, very broad issues we have. But we've got them in IT and we've got them in engineering in a few fiscal classes, I think. But other than that, broadly it was addressed.
All right, thank you for making mention of that. All right, I'm going to give it one last ditch effort. Anything that you want to mention that we can add to our agenda for our next meeting regarding next steps?
Chair Porter.
Yes, Representative Aurora, yes.
Yeah, a couple of things when you think about the workforce, which we heard a little bit even in the discussions, is training and some degree of also planning for discontinuity when people leave or for succession. So the question being that, is there a process in each of the agency? Do they have a specific plan for not only succession, which we heard already that there is some focus on it, but on training, because it's important that, because they're more young, they're more lesser experienced, we're losing some experience, so we can invest more, either whether it be management training or whether it be subject matter training. And the second thing, if we can put on the agenda, at least some thoughts to be shared, whether that becomes an important issue or not amongst members of the group. And secondly, about process improvement possibilities and how do we encourage that? Because when you are changing the workforce, and I'll speak that for myself, that there is a set of workforce which would find using certain tools very difficult, and the emerging workforce might embrace some tools, whether they could be AI, whether they could be just using spreadsheets, and I don't have specific things in mind, but process improvements as to how we do business. This could be an opportunity. Perhaps our group can nudge the agencies to say, well, here is an opportunity here. When you're changing your workforce, or your workforce is changing just by default, look at your processes and see, perhaps somebody will raise their hand, and it's going to be different in each agency, but perhaps we can provide some kind of a guideline or some kind of a nudge for them to look at those. So process improvement and training for the future, if we can kind of add those two things, and I had rattled off 4 or 5 ideas which I thought were being mentioned. I would like to kind of think about those two as well by the esteemed members of this group.
Thank you for that, Representative Aurora. And I see no further hands, so I'll just take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for making the time to be a part of this task force and for the contributions that you're making. And I will say that we have looked at the calendar, And we are offering Tuesday, December 21st. We're trying to stick to the Tuesday, same time at 3 p.m. for our next meeting. So if really quickly, I don't know if you could show of hands if that's a problem for anyone, or can we go ahead and say that Tuesday, December the 21st at 3 p.m. would be good for everybody on the task force for our next meeting? See a thumbs up. I don't see any thumbs down. All right, so we'll go ahead and just say that our next meeting will be for Tuesday, December 21st at 3 p.m. And again, I thank you all for being with us today. And I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. You all have a great rest of the week, and I will see you soon.